Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show that gives you an in-depth look at topics like what it takes to navigate your spiritual journey, how to heal yourself and grow your spiritual gifts, and balanced practices to expand your business and your spiritual leadership. I'm your host, Spirit Bird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My special guest today is my partner, Josh Meeder. Josh, welcome.
Hello,
Thanks for joining
everyone.
us.
It's good to be your special guest today.
So I wanted to share a little bit about us and our relationship and how we found each other and the process of calling in a partner and creating the life that you want and that you're seeing for yourself.
Yeah. So I guess we begin at the beginning.
Sure. You want to start?
Sure. So we actually met in a workshop, in a plant medicine workshop in Ohio, and that was back in October, I think, of 2020. And I was going to celebrate where I'd come in life. I'd made a lot of progress and some self-work, just done a lot of healing. And at that point, I was getting ready for a grand adventure. My son was graduating college, and I'd sold the house, and I was just sold everything I owned, so I was ready to hit the road. So I was there to celebrate, and that was my place. And you happened to be there, and you were doing some of your own things.
You want to share a little bit about what was going on before you were there to celebrate?
Sure. How far? Okay. So I guess the story really starts in kind of the healing journey. About 7 years ago, I had a partner that passed away unexpectedly and went into some grief and got into the world of healing and just had some great connections that really helped. And processed grief through different modalities, a lot of plant medicine there that actually came in. That's where I was first introduced to it. Eventually had another relationship in between there that was good, just didn't have a path to go. And really where it led up to where we met was I had taken 3 years to be intentionally single and just really to focus on this. Again, it was a place in life where my son was getting ready to graduate college. And for the first time, I had the ability to make the choice of what I wanted to do. I'd always been tied down to the small town in Western Pennsylvania because of family or business. And this was the first time I had the choice to make and direct my own path. So my plan was to sell everything I owned and travel the country. And I set out, we'll get into the story, but I did basically set 3 intentions for that. So it was to travel and explore, have a great time. It was to possibly find or be open to love. And it was to find my next home. And that was the path of my journey. So when we met, I was just getting ready to launch it. That was in October. And I actually hit the road June 1st that next year in 2021. So that was my kind of just celebrating everything that I'd pulled together to be at that point in my life where I was self-directed for the first time really in a long time.
Yeah, exciting times.
It was.
Yep. I was actually coming from kind of the opposite, so to speak. I had been traveling for over 3 years, all the time doing the full-time RV thing. I had launched my spiritual business. And I had just started to settle into Anchorage, Alaska. And I was actually in a loving relationship at the time. And I think it was sometime when I started to settle into Anchorage, I started to, I don't know if I've shared this with you really, but I started to intentionally call in a home, and for me at the time, it was a home in all the ways. It really, for me, it meant a home in myself, really being more in myself and in my center, being comfortable in my body, but also calling in a home where I could host some part of my spiritual business, where friends could gather. I kind of had a vision of like this great open room and maybe a little bit of a view. And so that was sort of like a very, very early seed in our journey together. And then cut to our meeting. Right before we met, I was actually courting joining a program. And I remember at the end of my call with the woman that hosted the program, having a moment where I thought to myself in my head, oh my gosh, my partner would be so mad if he knew how much this costs. And at the time, we weren't really even sharing our budget, but I started to realize that there was a big part of me that I was kind of filtering out to accommodate what was us, and that I didn't want to do that anymore. And again, a really loving relationship, but I just started to realize that I was interested in moving in another direction in my life. And so over a course of a couple months, I started to really tune into what I wanted, which was a partner that I could be intentional with, and create a spiritual partnership together. And it surprised me. Again, the relationship was fine, so it wasn't like there was a lot of problems. And then I ended up going to plant medicine ceremony and found myself the first day kind of saying, I'm not really sure what I want, but that wasn't true. I did know what I wanted. I wanted spiritual partnership. And so one of the first nights, I kind of just found myself speaking those words. And you were there. And you were more or less calling in the same thing at that point.
I was, yeah. And part of that, like looking for the partner, was the intentionality part of it, because I had tastes of it and I knew there was something deeper and more meaningful out there. But we did meet, and we were just in different places. So it was a nice connection. Of course, I noticed you, but that's all it was. And really, that was the seed. And after that night, what I learned is you were living in Alaska. And that's kind of the spark that got me up to Alaska, because I was doing this great road trip, living out of the truck and camping in a hammock, just loving it. And Alaska was the only state I hadn't been to. So I got really excited when you said that. And I was like, oh, I'd love to come up and visit. I shared a little bit about my trip. And you said, yeah, come on up. You can check it out. So really, for me, that was like an invitation. And I thought, new cool friend, we're going to do some hiking and get to see Alaska. And that was it for about 8 months.
I had other plans. It took me a while to get there, though. When we met again, we had a very friendly relationship, but not flirtatious at all.
No.
We had some great teachers hosting us through the ceremony, and they sort of like pointed to each other. I actually remember during ceremony, one of them saying, "He's right there." I think the words specifically were like, "No more compromises. You deserve to be seen in your brilliance." And she said, "That guy." And I remember I turned and looked, and there was like only one guy there.
I was the only guy. Kind of hard to miss.
But it just shows like the level of like, at that point I was just starting to even realize I was going to unwind my other relationship. So I wasn't even available to hear or see you, even though you were literally right there.
Right.
And there was no other option.
No, and I mean, that was part of it too, because it was very clear why you were there. So I know there was no opening. It was just like, here's a person in her process who has a really interesting story, and I'm intrigued to know more about and get a trip to Alaska out of it. And during that ceremony too, one of the facilitators go, she's waiting for you. She's right there. And she pointed across the room, and I looked at it, I was like, she's like, no, she's just out there. I was like, so we don't know what magic was being woven in there, but it was good. And that was the first meeting, and we kept in touch a little bit, but not a lot. And it was so right to kind of skip ahead a little bit, or was to the meeting, because it took us a good 6 or 8 months to actually meet up.
Yeah. So I'll share some of that. So for me, then I started to unwind my relationship, and I didn't date at all for 6 months, well, up until you came up. And in that time, I started to get curious about you. And also there was just a lot of personal healing that I needed to do, I think, to really ready myself for the relationship that I was calling in. Because it's one thing to kind of dream about something and say you want it and call it in. And then it's another thing to do the inner work that you need to do to actually be available to receive that relationship. And I think what awoke for me when I met you was starting to become available to receive support. And for me, for being, a somewhat independent woman, that was challenging me to navigate allowing myself to receive, or allowing things to be, collaborative and, in some ways easier, not having to do everything myself, so that we could actually create something bigger than either of us could do independently. And also I was just navigating how that made me feel like I might be giving up my autonomy. Also brought up a lot of like intimacy concerns and what that might look like, and what if I wasn't like mature enough or experienced enough or like adult enough for the spiritual relationship that I was calling. And so I had to navigate a lot of that inner work and kind of clear that charge from my system before we actually were able to rekindle. So now we can skip ahead.
Yeah. And, I mean, that was the same. I've been doing the same work for literally 3 years and getting aligned for that. And that's what I was calling in, was someone who I could be seen with and I could be met. Not someone that I'm carrying along or overtending. And that overtending piece was something that I had to work through my system because I did it naturally and it wasn't always healthy. So there's a lot of prep there. And literally that 6-8 months between, I was having a blast. I traveled to countries. So we agreed. I think it was the end of July I was going to come up. So I was traveling out of the truck, but because of the distance, I decided to fly up. So flew up, got in real late in Anchorage. It was pitch black, cool. This woman I literally met once, picked me up from Anchorage Airport, and we went back to your apartment. And I think one of the funny things that was really awkward from a guy who is somewhat of a gentleman and chivalrous is you had given me your room and you had taken the floor in your office. And I felt absolutely uncomfortable. Like, I'll take the couch, I'm the guest, you don't need to make exceptions. And I still, to this day, don't remember the words you used, but you gave me the quickest, most gentle and firm correction. You're like, blah, 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 no. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to argue. It was just like, well, that was interesting.
This is how I want it.
Yep. Very, very clear. And so that was kind of the first thing. And then the next day, we got up and we went down to, was that Girdwood or did we go to the mountains?
We went down to Girdwood.
Girdwood and hiked through Girdwood, and it was beautiful. It was the mountains. It was my first time in Alaska, and just to see the water and the rocks and this beautiful woman, and we're just hiking, and it was just really, really nice. Had a great day, and then it was that night. I think we had some dinner, came back, and I was just getting ready to clean up, going to take a shower for the night. I think it was the end of the night. And for those that you don't know, when the night's over, I'm done. I'm out. There's 2 speeds, on and off. So around 9 o'clock, I'm shutting down. And so I'm like, okay, winding down the night, going to grab a shower. And then you came down the hall and you're like, hey, I just want to clear the air. And I'm like, okay. And this is my favorite part of the story. So you said, hey, I just wanted to be clear and want you to know that I have a curiosity about you. And if you're open to it, it's something I'd like to pursue or see. And I was so taken off guard. I had no idea. It was right over. And I was like, yes. And I fumbled some words and I jumped in the shower. And so I'm showering off and repeating that, my ridiculously awkward response in my head. And then I'm like, I've got to set this, breathe into it, and came out and said, yes, I am interested, and let's do this. And that was it. And I went back to your room and slept there just really awkwardly. I'm like, well, what do I do now? and it was just a beautiful, beautiful night, or beautiful way how you were clear. And I guess to rewind 2 days is right before I left for the trip to come up and see you. I literally stood behind a building that I owned, and I had some crystals, and I planted one, setting some intentions behind it. And I put it in the ground, and I said, I'm no longer looking for love. I'm going to wait for it to show up and invite me in. And then it was 36 hours later that you showed up and invited me in. So I was like, wow, that's the power of manifesting. And
for me, on the flip side of that, I did have a curiosity about you. I also wanted to actually hang out with you and make sure that I liked you. And I remember that night, and I remember, my promise to myself before you came, because again, there wasn't any flirtatiousness or really hints, other than, I knew I was curious, but I was very, very careful not to suggest anything. I was really watching my timing, I think, for me, because there were multiple times where I just wanted to be like, we're going to end up together, because I had a pretty strong knowing at that point for, 5-6 months. And my promise to myself was that I wasn't going to let you stay a week as a friend and never mention that I was curious, or, just kind of wait and hope that something happened. So for me, it was very nerve-wracking to be that direct. And because also if it wasn't mutual, then I'm like with you for a week.
You got some strange guy in your house that turned you down.
It'd be awkward. Yeah. And so, that took a lot of courage on my part and not really necessarily my normal style to be the initiator.
And that was really good for a lot of reasons, because if you had indicated something earlier, probably would have gotten weird and squirrely and my brain would have kicked in and but the way it unfolded was just really...
Yep, lured you into my basement and cornered you.
Can't get out. But I did like the clarity, and it was exactly what I'd asked for, because chasing was kind of the pattern that I think many of us know, where you're chasing love or you're chasing connection, and that never seems to work. So that's why I set the intention of like, I want to be called in and welcome and seen, and it unfolded like that. So I didn't have any awareness to that point. Mm-hmm. Clearly, as you probably saw, the shock and like bumbling around. But it was there, and it was also doing my own work in the path I was going down. Is like I'd cleared my life. I'd put it where I can travel, that I can be open to love and finding a new home. So we had an amazing week. The next day after that, we hiked to the top of this mountain, saw this glacial lake, and I just remember like the awe. One of the landscape, and then following you in the back country, and you had this beautiful dress on, and you were carrying bear spray and hiking poles, and I'm like, oh, this is something here. That was pretty freaking amazing, and that was an incredible day. One of the things that really is kind of funny, I think, about the story is you really thought you lure me in with the fishing trip, which was really sweet, and I love to fish, but I'm not like an avid gamesman, and but it was so memorable. You got a teepee on the Kenai and Russian River. And so...
Oh, thanks, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Heather and John. So we got to sleep under the Alaskan long, bright sky in a teepee with the fire between us. And then we got up early and went salmon fishing the next day. And I looked over and I saw this amazing woman who went from this beautiful hiking dress to actually looking good in waders. I'm like, how does that happen? This is amazing. We had a great time. Mm-hmm. And after that, so we came to close, whirlwind of emotions and connection. I'm like, all right, what's the next step? I had been in a long distance relationship for 2 years, and I knew what it entailed, and it wasn't necessarily what I know I wanted, and I knew it wasn't yours. Mm-hmm. So before we left, we did have a conversation about that. And how'd it go?
I remember, I don't remember the specifics of the conversation, but what stands out for me is I remember like, okay, we're doing this. Like we jumped in pretty quickly. We're like, this is it. We're doing it. And so now what's the next step? And I did not want to mess around with a long distance relationship. And also I had already been traveling, and I also was settled, just getting settled in up there. So the idea of now starting to leave Alaska just for visits with you didn't really appeal to me. And I don't know that I necessarily even gave you all that information. I think I might have just said, I'm not really, I don't know what I said, but I remember what you said, which was, what if I just came up here? And I remember how shocked I was at the idea that I didn't have to change for the relationship.
Yeah.
And that was like that was a really significant thing of like, holy shit, like that would be so easy.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah. That's what I would like, actually. Yeah.
Because I built my life and I was able to do that. And that was a sweet moment, because I could sense it, like, I knew you didn't want to do long distance, and neither did I. And it was just, you were talking around and I'm like, well, what if I come up? I'm like, I made my lifestyle. It's not a big transition. And it was perfect.
So, I mean, I just want to point out that I think to not to try to get into the details of all of our little exchanges, but just the point of being clear for yourself as an individual and what you want, and having that conversation with life so life can show you what that's like. I mean, even just you coming up and, me receiving support and not having to change. you know, I had been seeking that. I've been asking for an experience of what this would be like, but I couldn't in my head have imagined or asked for that specific thing, you know?
Right. Yeah, that was definitely part of the process, was the clarity. And while it moved what seemed fast, it was very clear. It was very intentional from the beginning. There was communication. This is what I want. It was in alignment. And we were able to move that forward with a lot of ease, I think, very, very quickly.
Yep.
And yeah, so that was an amazing week. I came back to one of my favorite retreat festivals for a couple of days, and I was just on cloud nine. Everyone there could see it. And I took it was probably about a month before I came back and just continued my travels.
So I feel like we can probably skip ahead.
Yeah, so came back and eventually just moved up after that, and got to experience all that Alaska had. And that was an interesting place as far as growing relationships too, because it was a small apartment. I had literally lived out of a duffel bag for a good 8 months, and I continued to live out of a duffel bag. So it was interesting for a transition to get up there, new town, new romance, you know, small apartment, and trying to keep business going. Fortunate that we both work remote, so it's just a lot of juggling, and it was a good time. I really enjoyed what we experienced in Alaska, and I think maybe on this it was also a point of, I was there and I was invested. I was going to be there as long as you wanted to be there, and we had talked early on. It was going to be a couple of years, and there's a place in the winter, and it wasn't just because of the winter, but I did have a sense of knowing that it didn't feel like that was the place for me. And again, with how things unfold, I knew I just had to trust and wait to see instead of trying to push or make something happen. And that was the place where you came back in and you opened up and you're like, yeah, you know what, I could see a change sooner than I thought. And that gave me a sense of peace, knowing, okay, we're still in alignment with that, and I don't have to do anything. I just need to wait around and see. So there was a transition time there. Again, that was really pivotal for me on learning not to push or demand or take, but just to trust.
And that was wise on your part, because, you know, from there we started dreaming into, well, what do we want, and where do we want to go, and what is this next step? What are we creating together? And I did have a sense that I wouldn't be up in Alaska as long as I wanted to be, but had any of the suggestion come from you, it would have been grounds for some serious resentment, because leaving Alaska was very hard for me. And obviously I still struggle with that. And I remember before I left being clear too. I think I might have said to you at some point, is like, I just want to say this out loud, you know, like, this is my idea. Obviously you had an idea too about it, but this is my idea. I want that to be clear, because also, you know, it's also painful to leave here, and I don't want to get to where we're going next and then start blaming you and, you know, creating the story that you somehow talked me into leaving this place that I love. And so, you know, even having you, like, I didn't know you were thinking that before I started talking about it. And had you brought it up, it would have been harder for me to probably be clear about that this is something that I actually want. And so it worked out in a good way.
I think one of the other pieces to touch in that is one of the first agreements that we had was our commitment to each other to maintain autonomy. That was very on in our discussions, where we wanted to make sure that we held an intention for one another, that we didn't just merge, because we have a lot of commonalities in our experience, even in our businesses. You know, we did similar things from different angles, and both of us had been in relationships where, you know, you lose some sense of identity and become the identity of the coupling. And so very early on, we agreed, like, nope, this is what we're going to do. We're going to honor each other and keep our things separate, and we're going to learn how to come together. And for two very fiercely independent, able-bodied, capable people, that worked out really well. But there was a place of like, hey, we're starting to learn, how is this dreaming? How do we pull this together? what are the mechanisms, what are the practices to break down that rigid protection of autonomy and to create it and weave it together. So I think that started very, very early on. And that was even an example of like the autonomy. We each had to come to our own decisions on that and didn't have to push or ask.
Yeah, you mentioned some practices. What do you feel has helped you in this process?
A lot of it was just the learning to receive and actually experience trust. Like as we were building, we were still new, but it was the way you carried yourself. And I saw you doing your own work. So there was no place where I had to do anything white knightish or like you had your own stuff. And as did I. And like we already had gone through a lot of self-work at that point. So we knew how to take care of ourselves, but we were also learning how to take care of the other. And that to me felt different than in the past. There was more checking in, there was more permission, there was, more around it. And then when we did those practices was actually trusting into receiving it and to get the feeling how safe of a space it is and to know that that's an underlying trust. So I think it was part of trust building through that as well.
And there have been certainly in the relationship, as there should be with, or as to be expected in, spiritual partnership or a sacred container, lots of challenging moments. I mean, lots of beautiful moments, but challenging not in a way that is necessarily like fighting or drama, but challenging as in you're going to call out my more vulnerable parts and the habits or patterns that I have that I like to hide or run away from and draw those out. And so I can actually move through them in a way that it can be challenging. And I think vice versa is, that's just part of the process of not just learning a new relationship and learning how you communicate with each other, but then also learning the way that us on a soul level as individuals have kind of been designed to help us turn some deeper work.
Yeah. I know one of the parts with that is, for me, the experience was finding and being comfortable with my voice. I had known it. I've always been able to, let's call it, be persuasive, right? And that wasn't always effective in relationships. But where we would have a challenge, let's call it, and the challenges never rose to like arguments. Like we never raised our voice. We could be passionate, but there was never that. And that safety of knowing that we could engage without aggression or volume or anything like that created the safety container. So whereas like we both had the permission to be authentic, to be raw, to speak our voice, and because there wasn't that fight involved, it gave space. And what it gave space to me was like, okay, yes, I feel this way. And then it allowed me to check in. It's like, are my feelings right? What are they based on? Is this my trigger? Is this my issue? Is it yours? And that was monumentally changing or shift for me, because I was like, yeah, okay, I can own what I've done wrong or may have been insensitive or just misinterpreted. And there were few where I was like, no, you know what? I'm solid and I disagree with you. And we could leave it there and it didn't have to be made wrong. We could just know that, no, that's a place where we differ.
Another place that comes to mind that I think we've been unwinding, I'm thinking of a number of times where we have had a disagreement or a different seeing on something, and things get emotional. And for me, like, I think I tend to pre-process things, and I think you, generally speaking, tend to like post-process as far as emotions go. So a lot of times I'll be emotional before I really realize what I'm feeling and what's happening. And then we'll have a conversation, and then you tend to have the tail on that. And for me, I'm learning to give you a lot of space in that process. And I think that's a place where I'm pretty good anyway, but seeing you needing space from me or needing just time to process and be emotional, or if I've done something wrong, if I've hurt you, still giving you that space and not coming in all the time and being like, are you okay? You know, like, are you here, honey? And like trying to do all these
Not
nice
trying
things
to fix it.
to rid myself of the guilt or trying to fix it. And just, I've acknowledged my misstep. I've acknowledged my mistake. I'm sorry. And also that's clean now. And as he's processing, not again, like, I think being able to give you that space helps you actually be able to process it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've asked for as much on some of those. I do tend to, like you said, post-process, and it's usually a fixed amount of time. It's usually pretty quickly, but it's like, I need that space, that time. Like, okay, just to go through all the motions, check in where my triggers, just really to have a clarity for myself. I'm like, is this mine? Is it not? And I think that's really where it boiled down. And one of the things I appreciate how we've been able to do is, like, we can own our stuff. Like, you know, and it might not come up right away. It might be a clarity through the process. So we're like, you know what? I'm sorry, that was mine. So I really appreciate that. And again, it's all wrapped in the container of safety and trust. And I think that's what makes it possible. Or as your wise grandma said, the key to marriage and connection is really respect. Like, at the bottom of it, you know, I respect you. I know and feel the same from you to me, where we can disagree, but there's still an amount of respect. So it never gets really personal.
And I think part of that respect comes from being able to see where each other is individually, both like in your process and in the bigger picture of our life individually and as a couple and collectively. And just to actually note that, I mean, you said that, you know, our autonomy is important to both of us, which is definitely true. But I don't want to skip over that we also have a very intentional circle in between, you know, that we're weaving, that is us as a collective and us as a couple and what we're creating together. So it's both at the same time.
And I think we found that on the personal and the spiritual level relatively easily. Like, we fell into that place of trust and building together. It was, I think, the other parts of it, like, how do you integrate the 3D as well, part of that, and the larger piece of dreaming. So you can be attached on the personal, the intimate, and the spiritual level. But then there's all the other things, like we have our businesses, we have our passions, we have what we want to make a difference in the world. You know, we have finances and all that. So there was a place where, you know, I think it was the right way to build was doing those intimate, interpersonal, spiritual connections to make sure we had alignment there. And then the other ones came out much more easier rather than trying to figure them out in reverse.
So do you mean like when we would actually sit down and, you know, like kind of focus in on one of the areas and just talk about what you want and what I want and get some of that on paper?
Yeah, however that worked. And that, I think it started kind of with more general sense of dreaming. Like, what do you want in life? You know, we were in a little different places, and there were some things we were really aligned on and some other things that we weren't. And so it wasn't fully formed at that time. And I'd say when we started that discussion, it wasn't even aligned enough to form like a real direction. We were still trying to figure that out. And that's somewhat evolved, you know, as our relationship has.
Well, I think that's part of the dreaming and creation process that we're learning through our relationship too. And part of the trust piece is not actually having, you know, talking about actually articulating what we want, even if we're not clear, you know, giving each other the space to figure it out loud. And at the same time, just not having to try to like diagram and make like, this is step 1, step 2, step 3. This is what we want it to look like, and we're going for it. But actually just like calling it in and leaving this space, again, just to let life weave it together in a way that's probably better than we could try to, you know, figure out on our own.
Right. I think the other piece of that is we didn't do it with any specificity. Like you said, we weren't saying it needs to be this exactly look like this. It was more the sense, like the felt sense of what it would be like. Okay, we want to do something that provides freedom where we can explore, or we want to have eventually have a home base that we can host friends and family and intimate workshops and ceremonies and things with intention, like those things. So when we had a bigger, broader sense, I think it came out a lot easier. And then we knew when we got there, or we knew when we were off track. But if we said, I want to move to Midway, Kentucky by June 1st and buy a house and fix it up for blah, 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 never would have worked out.
Right.
But we knew that, hey, larger sense, we wanted to be kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but like making the transition, like, okay, we want to be somewhere that's on the East Coast, that's close to my family, my son, that's close to yours, and that was easy to travel from, a place of easy living, one where community existed. So they were generalized things, and we didn't have to dive in.
We would love some space, some nature around us in some way, whether that's a city garden or whether that's some property. We knew we wanted some greenery around us, but also it would be really nice if we had some city amenities that we could walk to. I even remember, we've got this gorgeous hearth behind us, and I even remember when we were talking about moving and calling in what we would want in a home. We did that too. You had some very clear things. I had some very clear things. Some of them were silly, but they weren't. And, I remember talking about the big hearth, and like we would talk about how we basically wanted this room that almost looked like a castle, just like one room.
Yeah.
And when we came here, which is not where I thought we would be living, I don't think you did either.
Didn't expect
but it was part of the process of like, this is what we're calling in, this is what we're trying to create, and we'll let life take us to where we need to be for that to happen. And we walk into this, falling apart farmhouse, and that I think the realtor probably was a little bit even nervous to show us.
Been abandoned for 2.5 years, water damage. It was not a presentable home.
No. When we walked around the corner, and you and I were both like,
I love it. I love it. Yeah, because that was one of the things that was big for me. Like, I knew very clearly for years, I'm like, what restores my soul is the home, is the place to rest in. So what is that? That is a warm hearth, a beautiful kitchen filled with great food, love, and laughter. Like, to me, that is home. That is where my soul recharges. And I knew that's what I would be building, and I was really happy to found you to do it with. But I knew I'd have a partner that could value that.
Yeah. And, we are still continuing to dream things together. And so who knows, how long we'll be here or what will be next as we continue to follow this trail. But right now we're celebrating. We've put in a good bit of work to bring this to fruition.
Yeah. And it was, again, going back to trusting, like, what we want. It did not work out in the time frame we wanted. Like, the reality is, I drove down literally 1 year almost to the day from Anchorage to Kentucky after we'd been around and we put an offer on. And the property was a unique situation, but we couldn't close right away. So we knew we had to be flexible. So without being able to close, we couldn't start work. We wanted to get in and start going at it. And it literally took us 6 months to close, and it took us 4.5, 5 months. So it's literally been 1 year for me actually landing here in Kentucky, driving down to the place where we can sit in our home and start working. So not ideal, not what we expected, but it worked out just the same. We trusted, and it was on our path, and that's what we put out there.
Yeah, there were lots of moments in that process. That was for me definitely a teaching on patience, and I don't like when life is teaching me that lesson. But there were lots of moments where in that teaching, life was giving me the opportunity to understand that it's working in my favor, even if it's not on the timeline that I imagined, even just with this property and it taking so long to actually close. And in that process, a few things coming up that actually kind of worked for our benefit. So having that experience of, well, it's taking longer, but also this is happening for you in the process, with the property nearby, and we'll go into the details. But that was, to me, that was a lot of the point is like, we still got you. We still got you. Actually, we have something better in mind for you, but it is going to be different than the timeline you have in your mind.
And it was a learning experience for me as well, because generally, see, you were upset. There was some times you were really upset. You were missing Alaska. Things were slowing here, and you were just not in a good space with it. And typically, what do the guys do? We want to make things okay. We want to come in and fix it. And that was really a good experience for me to learn, to know that there wasn't anything that I needed to fix, nor could I. Could only make that problem worse. And really what you were looking for and needed was just to be heard.
I just needed to express.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm glad I'm here. I made the decision. I wanted to be here. I'm hurting. There's fences everywhere.
Right.
I'm not in my damn house.
Yeah.
Like, we rushed out of there. What is this? And it's not, for me, again, that's been helpful with my communication and the trust and wanting to be heard without, being accusatory towards you, is being clear. I'm saying this not because I want to make you wrong, or I'm saying that you did something bad. I'm just saying that this is what I'm feeling right now.
Mm-hmm.
And having the space to just get to do that and not have to feel like I need to shield you from certain feelings or go to the other extreme where I am actually attacking you for something that's not actually your fault.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in that place, early on, it was me learning to check in, like, okay, is there anything I need to do, or is this needing to be heard? And it was probably a little bit annoying, but that was my part of learning how to do that. And you were gracious enough to let me know exactly what you needed. Mm-hmm. And if there was space for comment or engagement, or if it was just needing. So that was really helpful to learn more about you and how to best support you in those moments.
So to kind of bring this around, I think I have one more question. And what now? Where are you at now with?
Well, I kind of laugh about that, right? So I told the story how I set up this clear 3-part manifestation: travel, have fun, call in love, and find a new home. And I'm like, well, we did it. I'm like, I should have been more clear and forward thinking on my manifestations. Well, coming into here, I mean, we've created this home really to be a welcoming space. So that piece is opening up. Things are shifting in the world and things are shifting in business. So there's been this beautiful opening over the last couple of years for me, to have everything that I've asked for, to learn how to accept that, and then to really redefine myself from a place of wholeness and support. So I don't know. I know what we've called in. I know what I've called in, and it is, it's personal growth. It is more, friends and family and community here to deepen those connections. There's the continued, desire for abundance and travel and exploration, and not having to put a plan in on how that has to be. So, and also, the reality of this is I've been going strong for almost 5 months, and the last 2 weeks have been 14-hour days. So when I've checked in, it's rest, and to actually be okay with rest for a month or two, or however long it takes, which is not something I'm typically good at. It's like you and patience, me and rest, not always in the same sentence, but I know that's what's up. So for me, it's really rest. It's supporting what we're doing here and just staying open to what's next.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a match for you. We haven't really talked about this, but I'm a match for you on okay, we're here. And one of the things that I was calling in for myself this year is play, space and play. And so it's easy to fall into some old habits of working all the time, or like being a busybody trying to do things. So that's kind of where I'm at, is like continuing to fall back into the trust piece that life is creating on our behalf, even when there's moments where it doesn't look like it, or we're not really sure the how. So I think that's what I'm at right now, is, okay, let me just continue to breathe and let this process that I'm in and we're in and my business is in and everything is in be okay, or this place that we're in be part of the process. And I am looking forward to this space I'm actually, where I am is I'm really looking forward to create like new things, to really bring new things forward. I'm feeling really creative. I'm feeling like in a space where I'm getting to let some of that part of me come out, and some of that part of us come together in a different way. And I'm not sure what that's going to look like or how, but again, I think that's, you know what you need. And that's part of the manifesting process, is calling in the rest, calling in the home, calling in the space, calling in the friends and laughter and food here is all part of that process. And I think that's going to be fertile ground for whatever's next. And so my purpose right now is to just, even though I want to come up and like, what's the next thing, is to actually just be present here and enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's you've said it well. It's really, we get those things, we call those in by clearing the space that's in front of us, and we have the intention, so it's not drifting in the wind, but it's like we're creating space to allow it to come in, and now it's allowing it to come in literally and to receive it, and to keep moving forward with the intentions and the presence that we have each moment.
So that feels like a good place to complete for today. We'll be doing one more of these, talking about another subject, and we'll share that in the next episode. Anything else that you feel is important or that you want to name?
No, I'm glad that you showed up and invited me in. Thanks for doing that, because I would have missed out on all of this. And look at the prize you got. So it's all there.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Bye now.
Have you been hearing the call to expand your spiritual gifts and step into your next level of conscious leadership? If you're a coach, healer, or a spiritual leader, you can learn more about Shaman School and growing your spiritual business on our website, HoltonHealingArts.com, or send me a DM at Holton Healing Arts. Welcome to today's Member Query episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts.
From the Leading with Spirit private Facebook group, the question is, how do I tap into the interconnectedness of all life? And the way that we do this from the shamanic perspective is to look at things from all sides. So that means in any given time, in any given situation, basically all of the time, I am sort of like getting a bird's eye view. I am both evaluating what's happening in my life and my surroundings, what's happening in my particular healing journey right now. I'm also looking at the other players, whoever else is here in this scenario that I'm evaluating. Where are they at in their life and their personal healing journey? And how does that connect with mine? In what ways are they mirrors? In what ways are they different to teach me something? In what ways are they the same to teach me something? In what ways are they teaching me? In what ways am I teaching them? In what ways, also expanding that out further into the land I'm on? What is the experience of the land right now? What's happening on the land around me? What season is it in? What's happening in our social, political arena right now? And what's happening in the world right now? What is wanting to happen in the world right now? So that sounds like a lot of questions. And these things we can't really evaluate from the mind. Actually, if you just take a breath and sort of relax your energy, drop it deeper into your body, lower in your body, and then also kind of expand your consciousness upwards so that you get that bird's eye view. This allows you to actually take in all of these scenarios and be able to see really clearly what is wanting to happen. And this is where you tap into that interconnectedness in all things.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. If you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.